Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this episode we're going to discuss about ESG investments, environment, social and governmental things, especially COVID-19 situations. We have our famous speakers, and many people actually ask me about Mr. Rob from India, from here and there because of his analysis and everything. We have our another good friends and always supporting World Talent Economy Forums, Mr. James Eid. We have Madam Durga Das with her brilliant solutions, as well as we have Professor Viva. Already she is developing very interesting and very helpful. So I just want to start with Professor Rob. How do you want to analyze to this topic?
Well, in the technology segment that I cover, the investments in the COVID battle were largely in computer hardware. IBM spun up the Summit supercomputer. AMD spun up, I don't remember which supercomputers they spun up, but they spun up a series of supercomputers as well. And as you go across the segment, supercomputer and high performance computing resources were made available to researchers. And a lot of the work that went into finding medications or finding medications that people thought worked and didn't work, like hydrochloroquine, were done by those machines. And both the affirmation work to locate the medications and the work to identify medications that had been identified that weren't doing anything, a lot of that work was done on those supercomputers. And in addition, a lot of the genetic work done on the vaccines was also done on these machines, and that sped up rather substantially our ability to get both medications that lowered the chance of death and hospitalization, as well as vaccines, to market. So that's pretty much where my industry focused on the problem.
Thank you. Mr. Jebsid, how do you want to analyze this ESG investment in COVID-19 situation?
Thank you for having me on again, Sharif. You're doing a great job. This is a very complicated subject, and the tech sector has been a tremendous part, and you could really focus in on the tech sector to see how COVID has affected all of our lives. You know, Zoom meant something else a year ago than it means today. So these are things that are realities now that we didn't have to deal with before. And a lot of it is technology driven. So that's part of the issue. But the other things that are going on is like the manufacturing sector has been hit hard. You know, and even when people try to open up, they don't have the labor. They don't have people coming to fill those jobs. So the COVID has had a tremendous effect on our society in many ways. And so you can be booming in the tech industry and failing in the hotel and restaurant business. So these are different areas. And will they come back? How do you know how far they will come back? These are all open questions. Right now, we do not have an answer to them. And, you know, also in the question of the vaccines, there's been some interesting observations about the messenger RNA vaccines versus the vector vaccines, and which ones are effective, and are they going to be effective versus the variants that we're seeing, the South African variant, and there may be others. And what lessons are we learning from this pandemic for the next pandemic, which is surely down the road? So these are complicated issues that we are all trying to pay attention to and doing the best we can. But we want to learn the lessons so that we don't repeat the same mistakes that we made this time around. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Durga Das, you have your own solutions, Arrow, and it's doing very good job in South Asia, especially India. So how do you want to analyze this ESG investment? I think your company also get a very good investments for implementing South Asia or in India. So what is the impact?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, as you know, Arrow is in the holistic water management solutions, and in this situation, especially COVID, has done nothing but hasten the need to make people understand that we need healthy water to lead healthy lives. So it actually helped our business from that point of view, and we can talk about it a little later during the call. But having said that, I don't think, you know, environment, social, and governance is a new topic. It's a topic that was already being addressed But interestingly, people were kind of paying mild attention to it. I think COVID has only, instigated an urgency into people saying that you need to look at this now. And you can't put this on the back burner. You can't take your time to figure out whether such situations will impact business continuity, because investors bank on P&L and balance sheets. I don't think they thought about a COVID-like situation. And when it hit, they thought it would last maybe a month, maybe two, and we'll get over it and we'll get back to business as usual. There is no business as usual. We're into our second year now, and it's probably going to go on for a third year. And it is only going to make people realize that COVID-19 could be COVID-20, could be COVID-21, just like we have new iPhones and Samsungs. Every year we have a new model, S20, S21, S22, whatever. I think COVID is just the beginning. 19 is the beginning of people understanding that viruses are prevalent, are going to be here to stay, and our lifestyle, our complete disregard for environment, and our complete disrespect for nature as a whole is only going to exacerbate this. And we are going to face more and more situations, COVID-like situations, which then lends me to say investors have to take cognizance of ESG in their investment portfolios. They have to understand what this will mean. We have to do risk assessment based on what could happen if the next one hits us. We can't be always be playing catch up. We've got to start thinking ahead. But having said that, I don't think overanalyzing it to the point of strangling business continuity or business growth is going to be helpful either. So again, just for opening remarks, I would say that COVID-19 has certainly opened our eyes to the urgency of what we all need to be doing. We've been talking about it for years now. It's about time someone slapped us on the back. And here we are.
Thank you, Professor Viva. You also running a startup and very important technologies, which will be, I think, very effective for developing nations as well. So, how this kind of ESG investment actually helpful for this kind of research and innovative solutions? What are your remarks, and how do you want to analyze to this topic as well?
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to say that our startup reduction tech, the intent is to be able to offset greenhouse gas emissions for anyone in the world. Basically, we could do it from one location. We're certainly open to doing it from more than one location, but since the atmosphere is one medium, that is a commons to all of us, we can have somebody from Malaysia buy carbon offsets from us, and we can actually execute on them at our head office in Kamloops, British Columbia. So having said that, one of the things we've been able to do is we've been watching the whole environmental degradation and climate change field for a good 25 years is realize that, COVID-19 actually has underscored the need for us to really shortlist what we need to do to help ourselves out of this environmental calamity and potential extinction events. So one thing that I wanted to bring up is the governance that we do have access to with the wealthy. Now, I mentioned this before. I'd like to share my screen if I could, and show you this graphic. I can find it. I have to find it. Okay, sorry, I'm not going to be able to find it quickly enough. It's the graphic where it shows that the top wealthy people are responsible for half of the pollution in the lifestyle emissions world. And okay, here we go. So we all know that there is, an imperative to exercise some kind of leverage over the impacts from numerous cases all over the world of unwanted residues, including all the residues that we find that are hurting us in the atmosphere, causing climate change. So what I'm suggesting is that the political class and the politicians that we are going to, in Asia and everywhere, be electing into power need to actually start governing the wealthy more aggressively, and actually looking at retroactive compensation to clean up what is often left to the taxpayer by projects that are often privately run. So these externalities that have been foisted onto the taxpayer need to actually remain the responsibility of the people who created them. And the reason I say that that is justified is that these are ongoing plume events, and a plume is just a pollution event that is still occurring, that is not contained. So we need to actually really put our feet down from the political side and elect politicians who already have an environmental uh, agenda that will be less corruptible. The reason that I think we need to look at this area is that we've had 26 conference of the party meetings where politicians have gotten together with a lot of big businesses, and they have accomplished barely enough to even justify having further meetings when it comes to our environmental status. So I would just like to say that I'm going to be talking a little bit about the political levers that we need to look at. Okay?
Thank you, Professor Rock. One thing, as we have many audience from university,
Sure.
let's say at present, you are business analyst, as well as you have a depth knowledge about green technologies and other things. My question is that why different kind of bank and governments, even corporation, need to invest more on green technologies? How it will be benefit for the local ecosystem or the local community? What your advice, or what is the benefit, or what is the inside of the green technology?
Well, the larger firms have indicated that they're pulling in about $1 billion to $1.5 billion in revenue connected to their green initiatives. Entire classes of buyers are now asking their vendors what their green efforts are. How green are they? The vendors are ranked. The business tends to flow to those that are higher ranked in terms of their performance. Cisco and HP are probably the two most aggressive in my sphere as far as directly doing things with regard to the environment. Cisco has been very aggressive in terms of also getting homeless people off the street near their headquarters and stuff like that. They don't generate as much trash as HP does, but HP's been pretty good. It's on the printer side with regard to recycling plastics and making sure that ocean-borne plastics aren't going back to the ocean. But these things have kind of transplanted the plant a tree efforts, which really weren't much about anything that preceded them, and now the companies are pretty serious about conserving power. Part of that is because it reduces costs. But also making sure that they're not harming the environment and doing so indiscriminately. So the industry has been pretty aggressive about this, but I say largely driven by buyers that have shown a preference to buying from companies that have strong green strategies. They're not taking the rhetoric anymore. They're asking for results and rankings.
Thank you, Mr. Jamsid. You also have involvement with different developing nations. What is the inside story? What's going on, let's say, in Africa? Yes.
Well, I can't speak generally to Africa, but I can speak to the what has happened in our society. We became a quarterly thinking nation in the United States. And that global environment and that global thinking started to affect all countries. And we wanted the quarterly reports to the numbers to look good. And so that led to short-term thinking. And we have got to have long-term thinking. As Dugadas pointed out, we've got to change our perspective to make it to a longer-term perspective, which includes the environment, the effects on the environment. When I was in college, I attended the first available environmental economics class that was available at my university. It had never been held before because the environment was not considered part of economics. But we must include in our economic calculations the cost of the environment as well. You know, in the 60s, we had people with flowers in their hair. And then when I was in the 70s in college, hippie had become a 4-letter word. But there has to be a balance. We must achieve a balance between doing the things that are productive, making society work efficiently and effectively, but also taking care. We are stewards of the planet. We must take care of the planet, and we cannot ignore it. We used to pour our toxic waste into our rivers, and funnily enough, sadly enough, people downstream got cancer, and people upstream did not. We were poisoning the foliage and flora and foliage beneath the industrial waste, and which was not happening above it. So we really didn't pay attention to that. Yes, these are long-term things. These weren't things that were quarterly. You could track on a quarterly basis. And it wasn't until the river caught fire, a river caught fire, that we started to pay attention to this. Hey, we can't pour PCPs into the rivers anymore. There's an environmental cost to that. So we started to charge for that and have punitive measures in place if you did it. So people stopped doing it. So what are we waiting for? The oceans to catch fire before we start to pay attention? We must pay attention to the environmental cost of doing business. And of course, we look down on the people that took care of the environment, weren't worried about the environment, and thought about these costs because they weren't practical. But we have to get over ourselves and be practical as well as socially cost-effective. And so we must include these environmental costs in our economic analysis going forward, and that is very much a political reality. So I appreciated the politics being the pressure that you put on the politicians. So you don't vote for someone who is just business only, jobs first, you know, because you can make jobs through the green economy as well. Why would you send someone down into the mines to get black lung disease? What kind of job is that? Why not have them above the earth and helping create a vital economy that employs people, creates work, and so that they could feed their friends and family, their community, and we're all in this together. Why don't we just pull our resources towards making a better planet rather than making ourselves rich? I don't understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Durgadash, like when you move from USA to India, I just want to know the inside story of your business, like how you getting support from local ecosystem or from the investors or from the bank and governments, what happening inside or what, yes.
So when I first started out, I was 14 years old as a young entrepreneur in India. And I didn't know any better. All I knew was I had to survive and I had to make some money and put food on the table, and that was all I was concerned about. And as a young teenager, you obviously find people who kind of look up and say, wow, look, that's a kid doing this, so they will help. But then I went away to America and I lived there for 20 plus years, 24, 25 years, doing business there, and completely unlearned what I learned as survival in India, because living and working and doing business in America is extremely different from the Indian condition. It's a far more organized system. Basic things work. There is corruption everywhere in the world, but in the West, or in America at least, I didn't see it at the grassroots level. I saw it, it possibly with the higher echelons of government. But for a startup, for an entrepreneur doing business every day, I didn't encounter bribery. I didn't encounter corruption. But those are all very prevalent in not just India, but I would say in Asia, in Africa, and some other parts of the world. Uh, and sorry, I'm being interrupted. Give me a moment, please. I'm really sorry.
Okay. Okay, no problem. I think that we can start discussions.
Yeah. So I didn't experience that there, but I experienced it when I came back to India, right? And when I came back, I was back fighting the same battles that I experienced or knew about when I was young. And the Indian system, right, or the South Asian system is very different. And so it wasn't easy to kind of merge back in and find a way to work, because I was bringing back 20 odd years of the Western thinking of you do it right and you should get it back right, right? And of course, there's opportunity for everyone and there's profit to be made and you can be smart about business, but there's nothing else to be thought about. And here you have to juggle between multiple things. So coming back to our topic and kind of relating that back to the question you asked, India is a different kettle of fish, and I hear Rob and James and what they have to say, but it's incredibly different when you're talking about 1.2, 1.3 billion people, right? And you're talking about easily 300 million, way below the poverty line. You're talking about another 500 million, who are in villages and towns. We have like over 300, second-tier cities, villages, and their access to information or access to continuous communication, their access to money, finance, investment is far removed. It's just not what you see in the cities. So we're talking about a 250 million people or 300 million people equal to all of America in the top 20 cities in India who have access to all of this, right? And we are juggling between, all of us living together in a small real estate compared to America. I think India's real estate is like 1/3 or 1/4. And to fight the battles of environment is not so simple. Many of our cities go back thousands of years. So the road system, the sewage system were all made several hundred years ago, like 500, 600, 700 years ago. And to immediately change that is not easy. So it's a interesting question to ask, right? How do we bring ESG into the current system, given that we've all experienced COVID, like everybody else? We all are moving into the next round. And what are the options? Are we going to do something dramatic and force the issue? And if we do that, we will strangle 50% of our business. The rich will continue to stay awake and above. The middle class business will simply die and disappear. Jobs will be done with. People will not be able to pay their mortgages, right? Or pay for their cars. We will go back at least 20 years, 25 years in time if we take such a dramatic step. But of course, if we take it, we can then move on with the rest of the world, the Western world. The alternative is to have a phased manner of dealing with this. And it needs, we need to address our sustainability. We need to understand our social goals. We have industry, we emit gases, we are doing all the things that Viva said we need to address. And there's a huge opportunity in India because of that. At the same time, we have to have a plan that takes care of everybody, the poorest of the poor, the richest of the rich, and all the ones in between. It cannot be a one-shoe-fits-all solution. It's not possible, not with 1.3 billion people, right? So I feel government should work with business and with investors and come up with a plan that makes sense for all, right? And then put a reasonable time frame. We can't do it in the next 3 years, okay? Make a time frame of 5 years, 10 years, but make a reasonable time frame, but to get the job done. But if we don't do, we will go back to the Stone Age with the next 5 viruses that show up on our doorstep. But if we do it and do it in a rush, we will still go back because we will be killing half of our population's livelihood and income. So it has to be a planned, phased manner. a convenience that the Western world has. We don't have that choice in India. It has to be well thought through.
Thank you, Professor Viva. Like, let's discuss on North American issues, because you are from Canada and you are doing very like important the like technology developments. So if we just discuss, because Madam Durga already discussed about South Asia, especially in India, they have different culture, different investment opportunities. Everything is different if we compare North America. But we want to learn more about this North American cultures, about this Canadian approach. How you getting support from your ecosystem, especially investment or green technology development?
The machinery is coming into place for a lot of taxpayer-based and taxpayer-sponsored initiatives to lower the greenhouse gas footprint, and also look at super funds like in the United States for pollution cleanup. Those structures are already built, but they're not deployed to nearly the extent that they need to be. A good example of this is we all love the mystique around Silicon Valley and what it does economically as an economic engine. But as a clean tech company, I've looked at the environment around Silicon Valley, and it is actually very badly damaged by chip making residues from making computer chips. And they actually never did do the cleanup. And the reason we looked at that was to see if we could use an oxidative technique, which is part of the chemistry in our technology, to go in and clean it up. But they have absolutely no structure in place to clean up the toxins from making computer chips. So there's a lot of unfinished business in the environmental realm in Western nations, even though they move on to new projects and try to be effective in new areas or change the chip technology so that it is less toxic to begin with. So that's just one example. The Western nations have also done another thing, which I think is a mistake. They've treated a lot of the public garbage as an externality and are shipping it to places like India and places all over Africa where plastic garbage is being sent. Now, that means that there's no solution by top scientists and troubleshooters and problem solvers in Western society that these are being foisted off onto less developed nations and being billed as some kind of economic opportunity. This is also true for e-waste in Africa. This is a tragic example of making our waste an externality. So, you know, for the long-term strategy, there's almost not one in place. If you do look around and, you know, notice the details of these have been going for quite a long time. And the only, you know, unfettered wealth that's been garnered from the resources of the earth is in the hands of the wealthy right now. So, you know, the only way we have to make sure that we can bend some of that back into where it truly belongs, which is in clean tech, clean technology from square one, not just cleanup companies like ours, is to govern that wealth and to get politicians in place that are willing to govern the wealthy, because we are in a lot of trouble. We have a climate and ecological emergency, and we need our younger people and younger voters in Asia and everywhere in the world to start looking at putting in place politicians that will govern the wealthy.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Thank you, Professor Rob.
Yeah.
You are a chief strategic advisor for many big corporations like IBM, Microsoft, and many corporations. Uh, one thing even our students have in mind, because there are many entrepreneurs, startup companies, they are working with us. What's the difference, like when we build up company in Malaysia or in South Asia, but you build up company in example Silicon Valleys, or all of the big companies, what is the difference? Why like this different South Asian companies, or even example in Malaysian company, why they do not make so much of big like strategies for their developments? Or what is the difference of if we think about the branding, because IBM has big brands, or Google or Microsoft, they have big brands. So example, Malaysia has Sunway, Gamuda, but they are not like big brand like that. What's the difference, or what the strategical difference, how you set the strategy for big corporations, how it works?
Well, I can probably speak best to IBM because they were one of the first companies to go multinational in the technology segment. Over 100 years old now. They're also one of the handful of oldest companies that are around doing it as well. The way they were successful moving overseas is they set up branches in those various geographies, and those branches learned the unique aspects of that geography and then brought out products and services that match the unique needs in that individual country. And so the end result is the products weren't really made in the US for Japan, for instance. They were made in Japan for Japan, or modified in Japan for Japan. And that's been kind of the consistent lesson all the way through. If you can look at Toyota, to a large extent, they were unsuccessful in the United States until they built their California facility, where they were designing cars in California for the United States. And suddenly they changed quite a bit. We studied the competitive response with GM and Ford at that time. And the problem with GM and Ford's competitive response was it took them 6 years to do the analysis. And so that's why we had the Pinto and the Vega in the early 70s, because they were trying to compete with cars that were built by Toyota in around 1966. And of course, in those 6 years, Toyota changed a lot. It is that lesson of putting resources in the country you want to penetrate, designing products with a talent that's based in country for the people that are in country, and then using marketing teams that are in country with ad campaigns that are designed for those people all in country. And that's proven to be very successful. In very insular economies like Japan, it was the only way to do it. Japan had something called a kiritsu, where the companies would get together in partnership and block out anybody that wasn't in their group. The only way you were going to get in a kiritsu was actually be in Japan and be a kiritsu and have a Japanese-run subsidiary that could play that particular game. Nothing else would do it. And so what made the difference, I think, with the U.S. is about the turn of the century, as the last century, the U.S. was coming up very solidly in terms of manufacturing and becoming a world leader, and then had to sell those goods someplace. And so they early developed that skill set of going into the targeted country, building up resources there to sell the product so that they could move their goods. And to a large extent, I think it's why the U.S. succeeded Great Britain and some of the older countries last century in terms of manufacturing prowess. They both had the size, the physical size of the states, but this mammoth manufacturing capacity and the need to sell it someplace. And so that drove innovation that required them to put in satellite branch offices in the various countries they wanted to sell. So that's what makes a difference. You don't see much of that. Even in China, Lenovo kind of stands alone as the breakout company that was able to sell internationally. Not a lot of the Chinese brands move out of China very well. And yet in the Asian areas, they're probably the lead in terms of being able to break out of country. But their brands don't carry quite as well. And that's because they still haven't learned this lesson of you have to build resources outside of country to make it work. It might be their governance to a certain extent prevents that because Chinese governance takes an active role in their country, in their companies, and in the country and those companies' management, and that may make it more difficult for them to want to move independent subsidiaries out of China. But that's necessary if they want to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Jamsid. You have your own foundation. Beside that, your family members, your wife, everyone also angel investors. So when you invest on any startup or green technology, what area actually you analyze? Like if you make it simple for our audience.
Well, in terms of investment purposes, you look at income. Is there a return on your investment? That's the bottom line. And if they have no income and they have no plan for generating income, you don't invest in them. But if you can see a source of income, and what they need is to get started, they need to pool a certain amount of capital in order to start the process of manufacturing or building or whatever the technology is, implementing it. They need a certain amount of capital to get started. That's the kind of thing where you might want to consider jumping in with both feet, because when they become viable, then they can expand at a rate that is unpredictable but unlimited. And then you can get a big bang for your buck. So that's one of the things. I did want to go back to your question about Africa, because listening to the discussion about India, which I know less about, but I was reluctant to speak about Africa because it depends on the country that you're talking about in Africa. I'm in 4 different countries, and each one has different rules, and you have to learn the rules. So, and India is a large land mass. It has 1.3 billion people. There's no one solution for everyone. And so I think what we need to do is have a global perspective when we're planning, but focus laser-like on the individual community, what's adaptable for them, what's useful for them, what they can make work. Don't build a windmill where there's no wind, but when there's a lot of wind, build a windmill. So make it appropriate to where you are. So you start with yourself first. Think about changing yourself, then changing your community. What's appropriate for my community may not be appropriate for yours. So we have to be adaptable with our approaches. But with the global perspective is that we're all in this together. So we're all suffering. The airports in the United States are not the model for the world. Believe me, our bridges are collapsing. So what are we going to do in the United States about that? Well, our current president has a plan of infrastructure, rebuilding the infrastructure that's crumbling, that has been crumbling for decades. And what does that do? That puts labor to work, people to work. Now, will that be a big bottom line to the large corporations? Maybe, maybe not. But this is the focus that you need to do, is to have employment that helps your community, and that individual labor can help their own family. So this is the perspective, from the top-down perspective, but focus like a laser on your local community. And that's where you want to invest also, is something that will be productive for society at large, where you start with yourself, then your community, and then who knows where it goes from there. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Durgadash, like, you are from India and you have a best knowledge from Silicon Valleys and you are running your companies. I want to know, because like, even we are from Indian origins, and we always want to develop a better South Asian communities. So when we think about the better community, we have to think about women entrepreneurships and other things. What the inner strategy of the governments or the corporations in India, how they're supporting the women entrepreneurs in terms of investment, in terms of educations, in terms of empowerments, how it works. What your experience?
Well, India has always been a male dominant society, right? And women typically didn't do business, didn't work. They were homemakers, and they looked after children. And if they did do something, it was probably in education or research, something that didn't kind of put them out in the world, right? Because typically in India, men protect their women and they keep them at home. Now, it sounds pretty archaic and caveman-like, but there's a little bit of there's a good side to everything. But that's been changing, and it's changing as I have seen in the last 10 years, quite dramatically. And there are more and more women out there building businesses and becoming 21 like they would typically do, right? That's when the family says, well, get you married, my responsibility as a parent is done, and now your husband will look after you, right? And that has changed. Lots of women are not getting married that early. They are doing business. They're getting to say, I want to be self-sufficient. I want to make sure I can take care of myself. It's not to say I won't get married or I don't want to be, but they're getting, I would say, I'm not saying this loosely, more westernized, very different from the typical Indian arranged marriage culture, right? But then the arranged marriage is also something that one, can't really dispute, because with that we had less than 3% divorce. But when, if you look at the Western world, the divorce rate is like well over 50%. So anyway, coming back to women in business, it's changing dramatically. People are out there, but still the mindset of investing in women is still, kind of lagging behind. There is investment in women, but it's with a small change, right? It's not with no one's writing checks for multi-million dollars to every woman who says, I have an idea, right? And I can make something work. But if the same idea is brought to the table by a young man, boom, they will write the check. I don't know what that is, but it's still prevalent. And it's going to take time to change. It's not going to happen in a rush. And so for women, it still means that they have to take that pocket change, go build a real business, show them it will work. And once they do that, yes, they do get the big money. But it's still a journey to that big money, to the big check. Whereas for men, whether they come out of IIT or IIM or any of the well-known schools, I have an idea and I want to be an entrepreneur, we'll go do it. Can't really blame the investor also, because you have to understand that they are coming from the point of view that as a woman in India, if your parents are going to prevail upon you to get married, what's going to happen to my investment? Right? And then you'll have a baby, because they'll say you have to have a baby. And then what happens? And then you're tied up for the next 3 years. So obviously there's a little bit of hesitancy because of that situation. But I think that's, like I said, changing. But it's going to take some time. We have to be patient. I'm writing this book for entrepreneurs, and it's specifically for entrepreneurs in India, in comparison to my experience in Silicon Valley for 25 years. And the entrepreneur in the Valley is extremely different from the entrepreneur in India, and not necessarily because of the fault of the entrepreneur, because of the culture, the environment that we live in. And there's a chapter in the book called The 400-Meter Race. I'll take a minute of your time to quickly explain what that means. Let's assume, entrepreneurs from the Western world and from India starting the race. At the first 100 meters, the Indian entrepreneur is going to check out to see whether he's standing in the first, second, or third place, or is it worth running the rest of the race at all? And if it's not, he'll quickly get off the track. Won't waste time. But let's assume he continues because he's in the top 5 or whatever. He'll continue. The second 100 meters, the parents will come and say, you know what, you wanted to give it a shot. Well, good for you, but now you need to get a steady job. Otherwise, who will give you a girl? You can't get married. So they will prevail on the entrepreneur to quit and say, get safety first. Don't take risk. Let's say the entrepreneur moves to the third 100 meters. By then he's run out of money. The Californian entrepreneur or the Western entrepreneur will sell his mother's house. He'll take money from his girlfriend. He'll figure it out. He will do whatever it takes to continue the race. Whereas the Indian entrepreneur says, oh, I should have listened to my parents. Maybe I shouldn't have. Now I'll go take a job with Infosys. And comes the last 400 meters. It's only those few entrepreneurs that are crawling past that finish line. So it's just cultural. It's the background, it's environment, it's family, it's risk-taking abilities. It's not that we're not intelligent people in India. There's the smartest people in the Valley are Indian. But somehow in the Valley, they take a different risk. And whereas in India, that risk-taking ability is very, very different. So now you extrapolate that into women entrepreneurs, and you can answer for yourself how hard that journey is. And, but it's changing. I'm hopeful.
Thank you. Professor Viva, you are a Nobel scholar, and the very, very important technology already you invented, and you are in better shape. Or on the other hand, Madam Durga Das, she is just sharing a lot of challenges from South Asia. So what your advice? Example, you love more on like policy discussions and want to work with the government and other thing, what area we can improve, what area we should focus, how
Oh,
we
well,
can
yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. One thing is that just the same as it is in Silicon Valley still for women, I think it's still the same in Canada for women as well, too, women entrepreneurs. There still is a male primacy bias that shows up. The only thing you can do with that is work around it and continue to soldier on and look at other options, and create other opportunities so that you can keep the momentum of your interests going. Um, Government policy around hiring and supporting female entrepreneurs is policy that has come into place in Canada more prevalently under the current prime minister, which is really great. I think it's very helpful. It hasn't reached over into clean tech because not very many females are in the clean tech space. And also the investment community that we have in Canada, which is a combination of angel investors who are now fully developed into big networks across the whole world. They're still not really willing to look at companies that are there to clean up residue. They think that there's no business case for most of that because, it's not an area that's been highly explored. That's why we do have a climate emergency, is because with industries that have contributed to the CO2 levels and the refrigerant gases and all of the other leaked gases, there hasn't been an economically positive way to make them clean from the get-go, from the very start. So now we've ended up with our commons, our atmosphere being what is essentially viewed by our clean tech space as a mineable medium. Some of the companies in this sector look at CO2 as a cash positive potential revenue, but the engineering and the unwanted residues just to get at carbon dioxide are very high in some of the technologies. We know that a lot of engineers are still asking some of us in the clean tech space, what are your costs? Are they really what you say they are? Can you make a business case? So those basic questions, we've got to remove all the doubt, which for us, we're very fortunate at Reduction Tech because we're only going to charge $5 a ton for a CO2 equivalent removed from the atmosphere, which comparatively speaking to other companies in the market, some of them are still working at a $300 a ton cost. So we occupy the lower side of the market and we still offer a permanent removal solution. The one thing that we don't actually emphasize, but we can do, is create minerals from directly from carbon dioxide. But we think that the paradigm of always making profit, even off of residues, is kind of an unbalanced thinking, and that we should just actually try to be clean, and get cleaned up first before we look too much at trying to always monetize everything, because the monetizing paradigm has gotten us into a lot of trouble. It's got runaway windfall profits that are not contributing to things that they could be doing to help clean up what is an unbalanced justice issue where developing nations are bearing the brunt of a lot of pollution residues, and they're going to have to steward them in their own country from companies and projects that came in and left the residues. So it comes back to that, holistic responsibility, and we're still all missing the mark on that, because we have a lot of projects. It's overwhelming, the number of cases that we're dealing with in trying to clean up and actually truly respect the planet, which is infrastructure itself. It underpins life. That is the definition of infrastructure.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you. I want to take few questions. Actually, I think that they just want to know this ESG investment, how it mobilized to help the post-COVID recovery. That they want to know more about the strategy, that how this economy can overcome from this challenging situation. So, Professor Rob, do you have any analysis on that particular point, especially what the audience want to know from our speakers?
Yeah, I think it was that the question really is what is the social economy and how can it be mobilized to help the post-COVID-19 recovery? I think it's the one question. And a related question was, how can social economy help transform societies following the crisis? Social economy is looking at social behavior and seeing how it impacts economic decisions. In a way, the green movement is a social economy movement, at least with regard to companies. It's companies responding to spoken and unspoken need to be greener, to be more conscious of ecology and more aggressive in their actions to preserve it. So that is the nature of social behavior impacting economic decisions, and at the heart of the social economic studies. Not an area that I'm a specialist in, but certainly know enough about it to talk about how it is actually motivating a lot of these companies to do the right thing. I mentioned earlier that there was an evolution initially where the companies initially responded with kind of Band-Aid initiatives like planting a tree if you bought something. I'm still wondering where some of those forests are. The magical forests, I'm guessing. But now that they're doing things that are seriously trying to recover ocean-borne plastics, getting them out of the water, and making sure they don't go in the water in the first place. The current initiative that I'm watching pretty closely is called the circular economy, which is the idea of everything you produce gets recycled. It doesn't go into landfills. That's a whole lot more difficult than I think a lot of people realize. Certainly could work in certain industries better than others. Actually, in farming, we've had efforts to use a circular economy for a while. For instance, in my grandfather's plant, they would take peach pits and recycle them into briquettes that would then use to cook stuff. So it was a way to preserve that material from going into a landfill and being disposed of, which would typically be the case. But that's the nature of the social economy, is really using social influence, the needs of the populace to drive behavior in companies. It can be reasonably effective. I think it's often more effective to get government engagement and put in place a very formal reward and penalty system, so the companies that are polluting pay for the cleaning up of that pollution, and those that are contributing to the economy get tax breaks or whatever commensurate with the good that they're doing, and that helps the good behavior and makes it economically feasible. The issues with regard to doing things based on social focus is that people tend to be pretty sporadic with regard to what it is they like and don't like, and can often jump to whatever the next shiniest object is based on whatever media they're consuming or advertising they're consuming. So sometimes it's really hard to sustain social efforts, where if you have in place an economic incentive process, because it now becomes built in, it's a little easier to sustain the effort. It's kind of showcased by the United States efforts during particularly Democratic administrations to provide incentives and penalties for companies that are polluting, which tends to change those companies' behavior. But I think we could all wish for more. And of course the big problem is a lot of the money, as we focus, and certainly as we've talked about, penalizing the rich or whatever. A lot of those folks do donate to political parties pretty heavily, and it gives them an incredible amount of influence, making it pretty hard to act against them, because the politicians know that their reelection may depend on keeping those people on board. Probably getting that money out of politics would be great, but honestly, I don't think that's going to happen in my lifetime, and I'm kind of tired of talking about it. because we don't make any progress year over year. And so it's better to try to work within the system. And working within the system is that social effort, keeping people focused on the companies that are doing good things, promoting, buying those products from the companies that are doing good things, and then when needed, calling out for boycotts or whatever on companies that are huge polluters. But if we really want to fix this problem, we really need to allocate the costs of pollution to the people that are producing it, so that they face the full economic impact of their behavior, and that behavior is changed as much for economic reasons as it is for social impact.
Thank you. Mr. Jamsid.
That was wonderful, Rob. Thank you. I do believe I want to go back before I address what your question is to the 400 meters idea. I love that concept, and I set the school record in the 800, but I ran the 400 every meet because it was a part of the relay. And one of the things is it's not a sprint. You can't sprint 400 meters, but you have to get out fast because you don't want to be behind everybody, because then you have to run around people and you're not running a 400 meters anymore. You're running a 410. So you want to get out fast. But the other thing that I learned was that it was ideal if someone was setting a good pace out in front of you and you could get behind them, because then they were breaking all the air friction. And they were slowed down by the air friction, but you were right behind them, not facing that. So it's easier for you to run that 400 meters than it was for them to run that 400 meters. And on the last turn, that's when you took them. That's when you finished first. So these are just examples that I wonder if you could work them into your chapter, because there are more ways than one to run a race.
Absolutely. I will do that, James. And I will give you full credit for that.
Credit is easy, so I'll accept, but that's not the point. The point is that not everyone is an entrepreneur. Not everyone is designed to do it.
True.
People sometimes have support positions, and in some of these races, you had a rabbit who would go out and set the pace, and that helped you run the best race. So that was your teammate. So someone on your team would set the pace, and then they would have to drop out, but you could run the best race of your life because it was teamwork. Even though it was an individual race, there was teamwork involved. So, find your team. And some of you are going to have the ideas, some of you are going to have them implement it. And I think no one person is going to change the world, but you have to start with yourself. And you have these goals. If I invest in just green companies, it won't really affect the economy. But if I can inspire others to do it, and more people take that same approach, then, doggone it, you see change. And the thing is when you start out, you think, there's a big wall in front of me or behind me, and I can't make any difference in that wall. I'll give up. Well, then you're just another brick in the wall. You got to keep going. And if you start with yourself and then affect your community, and then your community spreads that to other communities, all of a sudden you're having an economic impact on the society that you live in. So I'd say start with the global perspective. That's where you gain your values. And then you focus like a laser on your local situation, your community, for solutions that are appropriate for your community. And I think that this is the way that you start making social change. You want to live in a just society? We all want to live in a just society. Do we live in them now? No. So what do we want to do? Give up? No. Keep going. Keep doing what you can. And try to inspire others. But also know yourself. Start with yourself. Am I the idea person who's going to inspire everyone? Am I a charismatic figure who's going to get people to follow behind me? Or am I the guy that's just going to be the rabbit, run out fast, let the other person finish the best race of their life? Am I just going to be the accountant? Am I just going to be this or that? There's no shame in all those jobs. All of those jobs are necessary if we're going to make it, and make it as a team. Thanks very much, Sharif.
Thank you, Madam Durgadas.
It's a hard act to follow from Rob and James. But I'll try my best from a different point of view, from a different perspective. So look at the questions that the audience asked, I find a number of people, at least around where I am, have all abandoned their original business model and have all started businesses that address specifically COVID-19. So when you're talking about change, you're talking about sanitation, hygiene, general social distancing. They have all found businesses to support this, whether they are making sanitizers or they're making air food delivery systems that for protective, delivery of food, social distancing in offices, um, you know, panes that you put between tables and desks. So if you're in the glass business, they have all transformed themselves to adapt to what is required to make this work in the COVID environment. And in a manner of speaking, it is social, development. It is social behavior. You have to remember, in India, we always did this. We didn't shake hands. And this meant basically when I do this and I bow down, it meant that I bow down to the God in you or the divine in you, right? God, divine. That's what it meant. And that was a form of respect, saying that I see the divine in you and hopefully you see the divine in me. This shaking hands was unknown. In my home, we always kept our footwear outside of our house. We never brought it inside, ever. It's not done, right? When we eat, we used to eat on banana leaves, and then when we finish, you and you put it away in the garbage, and the cow comes and eats them. So circular economy all the way around. So these were things that have been done for hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 years in India. And we forgot about all of it. And COVID just brought it all back. And now we do it as though we always knew what we were doing. So we had not been doing it. And it's now a process of relearning what our grandparents did, our parents did, right? And now we are going to have to learn to put it back in place. So the point again about business and social economy. So many people I have seen have taken this requirement, this need because of COVID, and actually transformed and started businesses, and very successful businesses, by the way. And so I think there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs. But then that leads me and begs me to ask this question. Should we all abandon the businesses we were doing and just look at safety business now, hygiene business, sanitation business, and forget whatever else we were doing? Because then we wouldn't, all the other things we need in life will disappear, right? So because somebody has to do with it. So to answer the question, I think one, yes, there is an opportunity for young entrepreneurs to look at opportunities because of COVID. And then there is the other set of entrepreneurs or people in industry already to see what else we can do to transform, areas of our business to meet these social needs that we have now. And because of meeting those social needs, we become a sustainable business, sustainable beyond COVID-19 and then whatever else comes. So I think both have to be looked at, both have to be approached. And I think if we open our minds to those opportunities, then there is a hope that we will still find an economic benefit. And having said that, Viva, I agree with you. Everything isn't about money. But unfortunately, so many people have lost their jobs that they are now forced to look at money as a need, as a way, some business to find to feed my family. And so I agree with you that big industry has to stop thinking about only money. They need to look at protecting the environment for the rest of us. And then, of course, the middle class and the young entrepreneurs out there hopefully can find opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Viva.
Yes, the meme around the environment has grown to a great extent, but I feel that it hasn't gotten a lot of laser focus to it, which is why I'm bringing sort of a laser focus to everybody about making sure that our politicians have environmental agendas. This way, I think they're already partially inoculated. Like, for example, in the United States, where there is the large private donor component, which has actually steered the Americans away. But it's very interesting that the United States is one of the only countries as well that has a super fund for pollution. So while they have problems, they have also got countering solutions that really just need to be beefed up and really revivified and activated, because let's face it, the Superfund would be a source for a vast number of green jobs if it were, unleashed. And it is very large. It's a very large fund, but it never seems to be fully unleashed, which I don't know what the barrier is there, but I'll identify that to you, Rob, because it is very interesting to see that phenomenon where the super fund grows and grows, but it doesn't get fully unleashed. And there are continuing environmental problems. So, just having the opportunity to discuss what some countries are doing is very good and very helpful for everybody on the call, that, the global thinking that we all have to have is rooted in actually being able to discuss what's going on without always the monetary base, because we are in a climate and an ecological emergency, and we have to find our way through this as quickly as possible. So the other solution for bottlenecks is to think in terms of top down and think in terms of bottom up, as some of us have mentioned, like James, that this is really sourced in our community. I think Durga and Rob also mentioned that as well, to the community, and that includes ecosystems between businesses. So, and they develop out of need and also opportunity. It's just that, it's a consistent mistake that we've made, that we haven't included the environmental consequences. And we're learning that hard lesson now. It's really coming home to roost. And we have to look at examples like super funds from the United States for other countries as well. That's a great legislative and governance solution that could be replicated elsewhere, that hasn't been fully exploited. So you can do top down and bottom up, and the middle class hopefully will be there to support and be intelligent enough to be able to work within that framework.
Mhm. Thank you, Professor Viva. Thank you, Professor Viva. Thank you, Mr. Markley, joining today's session. We almost finish our discussion, but thank you for joining today's session.
No problem. Like I said, I just was going to pop in really quickly. Glad that I could at least show love for you and everything. I was going to add just a couple of quick things that were crossing my mind as I was knowing what y'all were talking about.
I just want to one question for you from our audience. I think then audience will be very happy. Ale Ahmed, her question is that how can policymakers support the social economy to play its transformational role? So in terms of ESG, if you want to add some points, you can add. Then I will go for concluding remarks for today.
Yeah, if you'll repeat that question again and everything. Oh, I see it right there. Well, one of the things I was going to say, if you're talking about social economy, it actually comes back to some of the things that I was going to talk about and everything, which is definitely, I'm finding that a lot of remote work is going on now, and that is actually impacting our environment as well. So a lot of people are working remotely. I was actually in a couple of meetings. That's part of the reason that I wasn't able to appear at the beginning of the show. It involves remote and education and all of that. But there are a number of folks that are doing that. And oftentimes they will go, and they're even saying people will move to environments that are very much walkable and everything. So there's a lot of remote workers that are going to areas that are more comfortable for them because it's in a more environmentally friendly area. I know that Jim is over there in California, and there's definitely one of those areas that is where he's at. So people are going there because they're able to relax and do their work from home. So remote work is allowing a lot of folks to have that environmental friendliness that they want in their own personal lives. And then right here in the triangle, where I am, there are a number of jobs that are definitely related to the environment, and those jobs are actually doing well even in the COVID era. I know that there is a company called Green to Go, which is trying to get, and it's based here in Durham, North Carolina, but it's trying to get people away from plastics and away from the kind of things that too often our restaurants are providing. So they actually provide more environmentally safe containers for you to deal with and all of that. So that company that Crystal Dryzik had put together is definitely one that is doing a lot of great work, but they're also working with others both nationally and internationally to do that similar kind of work, because we know that even before COVID, there was a lot of conversations around straws and other things that were being polluted into our oceans, and were not just harming us, but also harming the wildlife that is out there in the world as well. So that's definitely a conversation that they've been involved in. And then I know that later on, well, actually it'll be tomorrow, I'll be getting my produce box. So like I said, that's another way that folks are doing things to help the environment. So definitely our local farmers are providing good food at a decent price. I won't say that it's the most cheapest prices in the world, but it's definitely fruit and vegetables and things of that nature. And the produce box is one that's here in the Carolinas, but there is definitely those all over the country and all over the world. So definitely that's just some of the ways that folks are able to personally be involved in our environmental struggle while also being involved in business.
Thank you for joining today's. This is actually our 255th episodes. So share our content as much as possible. Share our content. When we start, I think Professor Rob can remember that I think he is first or second guest for World Talent Economy Forum. From the beginning, from my point of view and with my team, we discussed that we have to develop some good content for our education industry, because education industry is in trouble. And from my personal experience, I learned that, example, we need more industrial people like Professor Robs, like Madam Durga, like Mr. James, like Professor Viva, even Mark Lee from the industry. And their knowledge is very important in this crisis moment, because entrepreneur can learn first, industry can learn first, and they can take initiative. I'm just sharing one information after 1 year. This is actually not a good information, but this is the fact. In South Asia, only for education industry, they lost this for COVID around $1 trillion in South Asia. It's in education industry. It's a news, just recent news. I think that Professor Rob can remember that more 1 year before we started. And that time, from the beginning, our target is that we want to create something for our education industry. World Talent Economy Forum, Asia Research and Development Institute, Al Noor Academy, School of Talent Economy. We are producing a lot of content with the help of our world best speakers, corporate persons, academicians, and all of the best people. And our objective is that we need to support our ecosystem. We need to support our education system. Trust me, without education in South Asia, even in Asia Pacific, there is a billions of dollar projects, nuclear projects, these projects, smart city projects, all of the big projects. But without education, everything is zero. There is a billions of people in India, billions of people in South Asia, and we have more than 500 million people, those who are under 30 years old. If we do not give them proper educations, proper knowledge, everything is helpless. And from my personal experience, I do work with the education industry with 100,000 students, with around 10,000 academicians, and I find that there is a lackings. In academy, we need more industry people, like Professor Rob, like Madam Durga, like Professor Viva, even Mark Lee and James Seed. Because industrial people can solve many things, even though our academician has to shift at least 2 to 3 months in the industry. By this way, I think we can change our things. Otherwise, I'm sharing after 1 year that yes, South Asia lost $1 trillion business only in education system. I do not know what does it mean. I do not want to criticize anyone, but India, like all of the big corporation CEO from India, in tech companies, in Google, in Microsoft, everywhere from India. So we need to fix our ecosystem first. We need to help our education system first. We need to save our youth community first. So this is the request from World Talent Economy Forums. Share our content. It's 100% free. And we ensure best speaker from around the world. and around the world. I think 300 speakers from around the world, they're sharing their experience, sharing their point of views and everything. So this is the right time. This is very critical times. Fix your educations. Otherwise, all of your big investment, all of your big thoughts, all of your blueprints will be helpless. So I request, even I know many Prime Minister office people's advisor, they always observe World Talent Economy Forum shows, many electronic media, print media, corporation, they observe our show. Fixed your education system, and World Talent Economy Forums actually helping to producing these things. So everywhere, it's not only in South Asia, it's from my friend from Brenda also advising on that points. Fix the education system. So this is our objective. I think Markley, you want to add something? This is our
Yeah, I
concluding
was going to
remarks
add something to you, and I think that Jim would agree with me. That's not just an issue in South Asia or in other parts of the globe as well. As a matter of fact, it's a big concern even here in the USA and everything, because we oftentimes find it even in our own education system, and it's supposed to be one of the top ones in the country, that too often we don't spend enough time learning about entrepreneurship and about things along that line, and we don't even necessarily get our entrepreneurs to cooperate with either our universities or our high schools as much as they could, and that can become an issue. I know it's an issue here in North Carolina. I would imagine that Jim has seen that same thing in California as well, where definitely we're not doing enough of this kind of what you're doing here on your definitely World Economics Forum and everything, which is definitely bringing the parties together, whether that's entrepreneurs, whether that's creatives, whether that's a number of other folks that need to be on the same page, talking to each other, but also sharing that knowledge to our youth and all of that. So like I said, I'm thinking that Jim would agree with everything that I have said, but I won't speak for him. I'll let him say whether he agrees with what I'm saying. But definitely, I know that here we have talked about the fact that too often there is a disconnect between our entrepreneurs and, I would even argue, our media, because sometimes our own media, I know even in the African American community, we don't spend enough time highlighting the great entrepreneurs. I mean, and definitely our newspapers don't do it. So I think that even our media needs to do a better job of highlighting the great gains that are going on within our entrepreneurship community.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today. Professor Rob first, then Mr. James Eid, then Madam Durga Das, then Professor Viva, and finally Markley. Yes, Professor Rob, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Sure. Well, first, a warning, since you were talking about education, part of the problem that India specifically is going to have is retraining. This week we're talking about the emergence of conversational AI. The initial target of that solution is going to be to take out call centers. The initial testing with conversational AI, which goes back 2 years, indicates that it is more capable than people, particularly people out of country, to doing the job, because it can almost instantly know more about the person it's talking to at a granular level. And in some of the early deployments, we've had issues where some of the callers have actually tried to ask the computer out on a date. It's been so good at its job. I'm kind of wondering what that date would be like, but I think there's a movie about that. It's about the one back where the guy fell in love with his smartphone, which would be very similar. But it is a concern because call centers are likely to become highly automated. And that's one of the low-hanging fruit with regard to replacement for artificial intelligence. We kind of hope that the AI is going to be used to help the call centers. And to a certain extent it is, but the language differences and accent differences have created problems, particularly with call centers out of country. And this seems to address that. So those people are going to have to be retrained, or you're going to have an unemployment problem. So now moving to concluding remarks on this subject, just remember it needs to be a balance. Government needs to be on board, which means you really need to work on getting that investment money, that contribution money from the large polluting companies, and segment that to the side. And companies that are polluting need to be held accountable for that pollution. As was mentioned earlier, Silicon Valley is a good example of where that didn't occur, where Fairchild Semiconductor polluted a good chunk of the county, and it was never cleaned up, and it still isn't cleaned up today, Superfund or no Superfund. So companies need to be held accountable for the damage they do, and those companies that are doing good need to be compensated for that as well. There's this general sense that technology is going to come in and save everybody. with O2 scrubbers and blocking out the sun, and all those things are kind of possible, but they're kind of a catastrophic response that will be required once we go too far. And there's no real guarantee that once we go too far, we can ever come back. And more important, somebody still needs to fund this stuff. It's not like suddenly a bunch of companies are going to pop up and generously supply trillions of dollars worth of technology without funding it. And so the money still has to be there, whoever's funding it, to make that difference. Otherwise, it just won't be made in time. And if it's not made in time, the outcome is dire. I think the comment I saw last week that hit me is, if you've got the technology to terraform Mars, you've got the technology to terraform the Earth and make it cleaner. And that's true. We could, but somebody still has to fund it. And without the funding, a lot of this stuff won't get done. So it really requires social engagement. You need to get involved, express your interest, buy from companies that are greener than others when you get a choice, and minimize your own contribution to waste as much as possible. Green jobs, there'll be long-term green jobs, there'll be short-term green jobs. You need to know the difference, because if it's a short-term job, you're going to need to retrain. And if I was to provide any students with any advice right now, my best advice is stay fairly general. Train yourself to retrain. You're going to have to do it a number of times during your career coming forward. So don't lock yourself into anything. Always be willing to look out and look for the next best thing, and realize that the grass may not always be greener on the other side, but if your grass is dying, you better find a green field. And being able to do that could be your sustaining skill set.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. James Eid. Yes.
Thank you, Sharif. Thank you again for a wonderful show. Honored to be a panelist. As always, I've learned something. Not been on one of your shows where I haven't learned something. And, I do want to just pick up on this. My father gave me a gift that has lasted my lifetime. And he said, don't wait to be taught, teach yourself. And I used to get a job, and for 3 months, I would be terrified that I couldn't do it. For 3 months, I would be grateful that I was good at it. And then for 3 months, I was looking for the next job. You've got to, in this day and age, train yourself, and train yourself again and again, because it's no longer where you can dock in and put in your hours and get a pension. That world is gone. So you've got to accept the fact that things are going to change, and you're not going to be able to rest on your laurels. You're going to have to learn the rest of your life. So this is one thing. And I did want to, Sharif, you alluded to it earlier. My wife is an angel investor, and for years been involved with this angel investments, Golden Seeds. That's to invest in women-led companies. And the idea here is that, just as was said before, it's not that Silicon Valley is a patriarchal situation where men get more money than women. This is well documented, and the women-led companies actually outperform them in their ROI and the return on investment. So this is a crazy thing, but it's a system that we have to change. And the way you do it is you focus on the similarities, not on the differences. You look at a man and a woman and you see what's the same about them, rather than that they're different. And this goes for skin color, this goes for ethnic background, religious background. Focus on the similarities, not the differences. And I think you'll go a little bit further. And the other thing is, money is not important unless you don't have it. I've had to sweat rent, and if you have money, people are going to want to come and get it. And so you go, oh, build a wall to keep them out. Well, it's not going to work. They're going to find a way around, over or under, or maybe right through the wall, and they'll come and get it. And it's leading to a world of conflict. And we don't want conflict. I don't think anyone is pro-conflict. So we've got to tear down these walls. And if you don't think you can do it, you're just another brick in the wall. You've got to get on board. You've got to do it. You've got to tear down the walls between us. Focus on the similarities between us, not on the difference. And, if you all start with yourselves, fix yourselves first. You can't change the world if you don't change yourself. Be open to change. Be ready to learn the next technology, the next job, whatever the skill set is. Teach yourself. And then you will find that you can continue to exist. And then when you've got yourself centered, balanced, then work on your community. start from inside, then outside to your community, and then that community can help the next community. And that's when you see societal change. That's the way to do it. And when I do this, I am thinking my light is your light. And this is what I believe we all should be doing when we greet ourselves, because the shaking of hands is pretty primitive. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Durgadas.
So I have to say, James always inspires the philosophical side of me whenever I listen to him. So I have to start off by telling you one chapter from another book that I'm writing. Just have to do this. So when we were kids, my father had this habit of putting us out, taking us out to the garden on full moon nights. And we were 3 sisters, and my mother would make like 5 kinds of rice. And we would sit around her, and we would put our hand out, and she would give us a little blob of rice. And you eat, and you wait for your turn to come back. And then you'll get another flavor. And you keep going around. Anyway, while we were doing this dinner and sharing as a family, my father used to look up at the sky, and let's say there were clouds. And he would say, "What do you see?" And I had a younger sister who would say, "I see a fairy tale princess." Okay. My elder sister would analyze the cloud and then come back and say that she saw a dog. And then he would say, "What would you see?" And I say, "I can see clouds." And 20 years later, my elder sister is an engineer with LinkedIn. She's a director at LinkedIn. My younger sister is a general counsel at a very large industry out of Michigan, Detroit. A lawyer and an engineer, and I am the risk taker. And I saw only clouds. I didn't imagine anything. So, just goes to show how things change in perspective over time, right? And what we see before as children, we don't see as we grow older, or we change as people. Anyway, so my concluding remarks on, ESG is in just 4 points. One, as I said before, COVID has only hastened the inevitable. I'm, in a manner of speaking, almost glad that it happened, because if we didn't shake our world up, this world would have collapsed very soon. So it was a necessary evil, unfortunate for the people who died, and I feel for their families, but sometimes pain is the only way to find resurrection, right? So I think COVID is just that wake-up call we had, and it's time we all did something. Having said that, I believe that the government has to work with investors and business, right, to make a change, policy change, understand, and each country in the best way possible, right, depending on where they are and what they need to do. And from the India perspective, which I've already shared before, we have to take into consideration where we're coming from and the people we have and how we can do this. We can also achieve the same goals. But government has to not be, unilateral in their thinking about how they will fix it. They have to participate with industry, with business, with investors and entrepreneurs, and ask what can we do together to make this change happen, and in a reasonable period of time. Having said that, regulation is important, but it shouldn't strangle anyone, right? Like I said, the middle class, the small business cannot die, because that is a huge part of the Indian economy. And so, and in many parts of the world, in the US as well, small business, a local business is important. It's important for the fabric of our society. And I think government has to take into cognizance what they need, and not just look at the big industry and, how to fix their problem. And last but not least, there's opportunity at every challenge. COVID has opened up opportunity within industry to find new ways of sustainability, new ways of doing business, new way of supply chain. We have to be careful. We have to assess risk. We cannot be in the same situation going forward. We have to know how to handle ourselves better. And for young entrepreneurs, there is opportunity whenever challenges are there. So I can only say, keep your eyes open, and look out for those small opportunities. Don't be afraid to take that step forward, and if you want, Sharif, give me a call. You can get through to me from him, and I'm happy to help. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you.
Always a wonderful session with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Viva, what's your concluding remarks?
Yes, not very much, but just to say that when you have such a small field, such as the one we're occupying, which is greenhouse gas cleanup, it looks on the face of it both daunting and also disappointing, because there's a limited amount of chemistry that can universally and safely address all the greenhouse gases, or even one at a time. So, all I can say about reduction tech is that we're very pleased that our pricing model and business model is at the lower end. It should be reassuring to people that we can actually do projections at $5 a ton for a CO2 equivalent, or if we're directly working on carbon dioxide itself, it's only about $40 to $50 a ton straight out of the smokestack. So we will, continue to remind people that we occupy the lower cost level, and we're also lower engineering, lower residue. We're highly sustainable because our ceramic is recyclable, so we can, while we're tearing up the earth to grab our minerals to put them together for our smart ceramic, we only do it once, and we capture that into a stream on the long-term basis and make it very sustainable. The other thing about our jobs is that they're not high education requirement jobs. They're basically a lot of people trained out of high school could work for our company, and we think that the initial job creation is going to be about 1,500 jobs, and in Canada that's fairly significant. That's where we're located, is in Canada. So we'll try to plug into the machinery that's coming into force in Canada for us and move forward with both tapping the private market as well as what's called the compliance market. There is a compliance market, which means that required CO2 removal by government is now becoming an actual market. And that's because of the Paris Agreement targets. So the governments are mandating a certain amount of gas that has to be removed back out of the atmosphere. So the next thing I would say, as a community between all of us, I would encourage you to watch COP26 outcomes. We're very concerned that there's a lot of conflict of interest there. So as many eyes as possible beyond the outcomes there, where we should actually start to see mandates come out of the international community for greenhouse gas removal from the atmosphere, which means they need to be encouraging technology directly. So, we are quite far into the climate change problem, and it's time for technology to be vetted and deployed, at scale. So I encourage you to watch COP26.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Mr. Markley, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Oh, no problem. Glad to have some concluding remarks and everything. One of the things I was definitely agreeing with a lot of the things that the other folks were saying about where we are and how we're going and all of that. And definitely, I am a big fan of the kind of new industries that are being created, whether that's wind technology or whether that's some of the solar energy and things along those lines. And I hope that we will continue seeing more research in those fields and actually more businesses being created out of that area, because I do know that that is going to be a necessity as we move forward and all of that. So definitely we're seeing some of that kind of work even here in North Carolina. So I'm hoping that we'll see more of that work and even more companies coming along those lines. If you'll remember, I know that definitely in my lifetime, most people might have like maybe 2 or 3 jobs and things of that nature. I definitely remember that my grandfather, who was a farmer, that was pretty much the only job that he held during his entire lifetime and all of that. I mean, he was also involved in the church, but in terms of work, it was farming. And his wife, my grandmother, was a school cafeteria worker. But I know that my dad himself is probably on about his 5th or 6th career. And I think that that's the way that we're just going to see both in all of the generations, whether that's somebody like my dad, who is now in his 80s and everything, and is in his fifth or sixth career as an artist and a very successful artist. But he's also been a civil rights activist, been a professor on the university level, been a radio host like myself, and done a number of other jobs. But he is flourishing and doing quite well with his artwork. And definitely a lot of folks will look up Jim Lee and see his name and know that he is a great and successful local, and I would even argue regional artists. So I think that that's going to be the wave of the future, where many folks will have to, as Jim was saying, know many skills and know many abilities. So I don't think there we're going to be any time in the near future where you're just in one job. I think that you need to be continuously learning, continuously developing. And that's one of the things that I love about what you're doing, Sharif, is that you're giving people an opportunity to learn about various aspects of what's going on in the world and all of that. So definitely I can relate to a lot of the things that other folks have been saying as well, because definitely imagination is an important part of us going forward in terms of creating new jobs and definitely supporting our entrepreneurs. As a matter of fact, I just had the pleasure on a similar kind of call yesterday of meeting a 16-year-old filmmaker, 16-year-old young lady by the name of Bianca. I'm trying to remember her last name, and it's not coming to me. I think it's Bianca James or something like that. But definitely, she's 16 years old, and if you heard her talking, you would think that she's got the wisdom of some of the more established Hollywood filmmakers, and she's over there in New Mexico, but she's actually running an entire crew of folks, including some folks that are much older than her. So definitely she's learning about that film industry at a very young age. And there's been some folks that I've seen that have started their own businesses as well that are in that youth force. So I think that we need to find as many ways as possible to support our entrepreneurs and to continue supporting our entrepreneurs, whether that is the ones that are coming out of the youth camp, like that 16-year-old, or whether that's entrepreneurs that are much older, because I've seen entrepreneurs that have even developed ideas that are well into their middle age and maybe even into their elderly ages as well. So definitely any way that we can support our entrepreneurship community, we need to do that on a regular basis and all of that. So definitely, I believe that that's one of the things that we have to do on a regular basis. And by the way, I forgot the young lady's name that was talking about the incidents that she had with the clouds, but I can definitely relate to that and everything, because I know that I've had friends of mine that have looked at clouds and only seen the cloud. They haven't necessarily seen like the shapes or things along those lines. And I've always had folks in my family that were also storytellers as well. And sometimes those storytellings can interest into some interesting comments just about the way folks are raised and everything. And one of the stories that I like to share, and then I'll leave on this note, is one that my mom shares with me on a fairly regular basis. And that was actually involving my granddad, the farmer and everything. And there was a bull, because they, like I said, they were on the farm, and the bull was a little bit loose and was trying to get in and everything. And I remember my granddad was trying to get his 4 daughters to help corral the bull into the truck and everything, and they were all chasing it around and trying to run the bull in and everything. And the bull, of course, was not cooperating in any sense of wanting to get into that truck. Probably knew it was going off to auction or slaughter or going back into the pen, if nothing else. But that bull was not trying to cooperate and everything. And I just remember the way that mom tells the story is that at some point, granddad was sitting there looking at all the girls trying to get that bull in there. And then they looked back at him and was like, well, if you want to get the bull in there, why don't you come out here and do it, since you know how to do it so well and everything. So they all chuckled about that. And eventually they did get the bull into the pen and got it back where they wanted it. But they were all running around like chickens with their heads cut off and all of that. But he was finding that to be a very humorous moment of needing to have cooperation. And isn't that, in the end of the day, what we're all looking for is cooperation in order to accomplish our goals.
Thank you for joining today, and it's really great session for us, especially for our audience. Dear audience, please share today's session as much as possible, and thank you, honorable speaker, for joining today's session. So hopefully in the future we can arrange more discussion like this. Thank you, Professor Rob, Mr. James Eid, Madam Durga Das, Professor Viba, and Mr. Markley. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Bye bye and take care.